I think that everybody here knows that at the end of our service in the sanctuary, a lot of people go down to the fellowship hall and enjoy some time over some broken bread of some sort or the other. And every week it sort of just appears. Wonderful food. So you're invited to do that. And today I'm going to give you fair warning, there's some chicken down there. Our friend Aubrey brought a lot of chicken. I helped him with it this morning to get it in the oven to warm it up. And it just has keyed a story in my own mind. So thanks, Aubrey, for bringing the chicken. And here's the story. You know, Colonel Sanders does chicken, right? And about that chicken, it is said it is finger licking good. Yeah, it is. Well, some years ago, I went to NAACP meeting, and one of the sponsors was Joe Delta, who's a businessman and a former Politico in Baton Rouge, has a place called the Chicken Shack over on Acadian, north of Florida. And in the program where the sponsors had advertisements, there was Mr. Delpit's Chicken Shack advertisement. Now, finger licking good is good stuff, but Mr. Delpit's advertisement said knuckle sucking good. That's chicken, let me tell you. So Aubrey has brought some knuckle sucking good chicken, and I encourage you to go back there and do that. I used that in a sermon at First Methodist. Mr. Delpit heard it on television and invited me to his chicken shack to have chicken lunch with him and with his lovely wife, whose name is Precious. And it was a delightful kind of thing. Knuckle sucking good. I like that kind of thing. Knuckle sucking. So, okay, disclosure. I'm going to use a word this morning that in some context is not the kind of word you want to use in church. It is a four-letter word, I think fair to say. But then again, as a way of defending myself, the lovely, urbane, sophisticated, beautiful Frances Bennett was heard to use one of those words this morning before church started. So Frances, you're identified. And she can tell you what she said. I'm not going to tell you what she said, but it was cute and it was lovely. And if Frances can get away with it, maybe I can too. So you get ready for this and we'll see where we go. So, but here we are. Okay, now we know that this world's in a, as somebody likes to say, mill of a hess. It is just a broken world. And everywhere you turn, it seems the news just comes at us with people in antagonistic positions vis-a-vis one another. Whether it's politicians, whether it's neighbors, whether it's nations, the world is in tough shape. But it's not new, if that's of any comfort. It's been that way for a long, long time. And a long time ago, in the great and holy city of Jerusalem, the people, after a period of exile, were allowed to come home to Jerusalem, and they found the place in total disarray. The city had been sacked, and all of the good stuff had been carried off, and it was more or less just a pile of rubble. And two leaders of the Israel nation, one named Ezra and one named Nehemiah, said this has to be addressed. And first of all, they did an analysis. Why are we in such tough straits? Why is our city so destroyed? Why is our country so broken? And they concluded it was because they hadn't done what God wanted them to do. And one of the things that they thought that God wanted them to do was to maintain Jewish purity. And so all of the time that the children of Israel had been in exile in Babylon, 70 years, some of them had fallen in love with Babylonian wives and had married these people and had children with them. And Ezra the priest said, that's the problem. The fact that you have intermingled with other people who are different from us has caused God's great wrath to fall upon us, and we got to clean up our act. And so in what has to be one of the most brutal edicts in Scripture, they say, send your wives home, send your children home, break up families. This cannot be allowed. And here's the word, the last word in the book of Ezra. All these had married foreign women, and they sent them away with their children. In the name of religion, families destroyed, broken apart, women and children sent away, sent away. And then old Nehemiah shows up, and Nehemiah says, you see the trouble that we are now in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem so that we may no longer suffer disgrace. Let's build a wall. Let's build a safety barrier. around us and the rest of the world. Let's build a wall. Hold those two in your mind. The edict that sends foreigners away, the proclamation, let's build a wall. And try this text out. This is in the book of Acts. This is the day of Pentecost, when the Spirit fell and really the birth of the church happened. And at the end of that, after Peter preaches this brilliant sermon, comes this descriptive narrative. All came upon everyone, because many wonders and signs were being done by the apostles. And all who believed were together, and all had things in common. And they would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. Hear this text. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. This is the holy word of God. All of creation speaks God's holy word, but the scriptures refine that and focus it for us. May these words find deep root and resonance in our lives. Thanks be to God for the truth of this ancient wisdom. Okay, here we go, stepping off into it. A couple of Sundays ago, if you follow the liturgical calendar, was Pentecost Sunday. Pentecost Sunday, a celebration of Acts 2. A celebration of the birth of the church. And by the way, in Acts 10, there is another Pentecost. This Acts 2 Pentecost is a Jewish Pentecost. And all the Jews are there in Jerusalem for that festival that comes 50 days after Passover, celebrating Pentecost. And the Spirit falls. And there are people, if you read the text, from different nations. There are, Italians and Greeks and French and Germans and all of that mixed in. And yet somehow, the miracle of Pentecost is that all of this diversity finds a unity because they can understand each other. They know what each is saying, even though they're speaking in different tones. Pentecost is an answer to the 11th chapter of Genesis and the Tower of Babel, where the human overreached and tried to become like God, and said, we will build a tower up into heaven and thereby know everything that God knows. And God said, I can't let this happen, according to that ancient story. I will confuse their speech. And thus all they could do was babble. Because if you can't communicate, you can't build anything, can you? You can't build a doghouse without communicating. So Pentecost, they all heard, each one speaking in his own language, and they understood. And the second Pentecost is in the 10th chapter of Acts. It's the Gentile Pentecost, where Peter is summoned to the house of Cornelius, the Roman centurion, and there concludes in these marvelous words that God doesn't show any partiality. And the non-Jews, the Gentiles, are now brought into the church, and the church is expanding. So that's Pentecost, okay? Well, a couple of Sundays ago, churches that are sort of hoity-toity and follow the liturgical calendar celebrated Pentecost. And a friend of mine, whose wedding, by the way, I officiated at last night, wonderful woman named Pam Coffey, she's now Pam Williams. I officiated with her and Ben last night at a little wedding in Capitol Heights. It's called Be Nice Park. And if you want to see something unique, and if you've not found that, drive down Capitol Heights today till you see this. It's a private home, really, but it's a home that's opened itself, and they have music and all sorts of things. You can walk in, and it's really cool, and that's where we did the wedding. Well, anyway, Pam is a unique child of God. Redhead, mind works in a different way than a lot of normal minds, which is a good way for a mind to work when you think about it. And every once in a while, Pam will send me an email, just out of the blue, just something she's thought, and I guess she hits the keystroke with my email address and sends it to me. I always enjoy getting what she has to say because they are delightfully different. So she sent this email and she said, I went to church Sunday, it was Pentecost Sunday. Here comes Diane, God bless her, in the traffic out there. And Diane, I'm about to just rip it right now. You didn't hear the context, so just suck in some air and hang in there, okay? You'll be all right. Okay, good. So it's good to see you. So she sends me this email that says, I went to church on Sunday, and the whole place was decorated in red. Well, Pentecost and red go together because the flames, the red flame, came to rest on the believers. And then Pam said, and I always go to sleep in church. She said it's the most boring thing, and I always go to sleep. We have a preacher who can't preach, and so I just sleep. But she said I was dozing off, and I was a half second between consciousness and slumber when this thought occurred to me, which I want to ask you, me. Do you think that there is a difference between batshit crazy and Pentecost? Now that's the word, Diane. That's the word. Batshit crazy and Pentecost. Do you think there's a difference? Well, I read that first of all and I thought, this is weird. And then I reflected on it. And it occurred to me that may be one of the most powerful theological insights into God's Spirit that there is. Because when God's Spirit infects us, and when we get caught up in this thing called love and all of its mystery, the world is going to look at us and say, you're batshit crazy. You can't live like that in this world. So we have Ezra and Nehemiah, who are over here saying, we got to clean up our acts. We've got to do the law stuff. We've got to build the wall. We've got to purify the nation. We've got to get back to being right again with God. And then you have the second chapter of Acts, and you have all of these people together, and what are they doing? They're selling their possessions, they're putting it into some common pool, they're distributing it so that everybody has what they need. And you get economists to look at that and they say that's batshit crazy. You get politicians to look at it and they say same thing. You get some churches to look at it and they say the same thing. No, what we need are some walls. We need to wall us in and keep those people out. We need to bring in our rules and keep those other crazy ideas at bay. Pentecost, filled with the spirit of love and with compassion. What's wrong with walls? That's a fair question. Why don't we have some walls? Well, I think there's some things that are wrong with walls. For one thing, when you just wall in yourself, is that my phone? One of those batshit days.
It's God.
It's God. I'll just turn it off. How about that? So, when you just wall in people that look like you, don't you think that would be kind of boring? I mean, just if everybody looks like you. Everybody likes the same food. Everybody likes the same music. Everybody likes the same books and TV shows. Everything's the same. Boring. There was a woman who had some puppies, and she had a husband, and she put an ad in the paper. She said, my husband says either he or the puppies go. She says in the ad, puppies are adorable, fat, pedigreed. Husband is rude, fat, mixed breed. Take your pick. Well, if you had the chance to take your pick, would you choose only like-minded people to live with? It might be a safe way to do that. Ezra thought it would be. But with that security would come a whole lot of monotony and a whole lot of boredom. Wall building. What's wrong with walls? Well, for one thing, it's been my experience that every time you build a wall, you just court more trouble. No sooner has the task been completed than the dissension breaks out within the wall. And this is how it says it in Nehemiah. Now there arose a great outcry of the people and of their wives against their Jewish brethren. In other words, having built the wall around the city, they eventually had to have guards to protect those inside the walls. Walling in, trust me, always leads to more trouble. Always. And that's one of the things that institutions have to be particularly mindful of. When an institution's agenda is to define itself primarily and to keep that definition like a wall before itself and the world, that's an institution that's not going to go very far. Walls divide, and walls hurt, and walls lead to trouble. As illustrated by this minister who returned to a church that he once served, and he ran into a man named Bill, and Bill had been an outstanding leader in the congregation, but Bill didn't attend church anymore. And so the minister said to him, Bill, what happened? You used to be there every time that the doors opened. Well, said Bill, A difference of opinion arose in our church. And some of us couldn't accept the decision that was made, so we started a church of our own. The minister said, "Is that where you worship now?" "No." Bill said, "We found that there too, the people were not faithful, and so a small group of us began to meet in a rented hall at night." "Well, has that worked out?" said the minister. "No, can't say that it has," said Bill. "The devil was active in that fellowship too, so my wife and I withdrew and we began to worship on Sunday at our home by ourselves." "Then you've at last found some inner peace," said the minister. "No," said Bill, "I'm afraid we haven't. My wife began to develop ideas that were not four square, so now she worships in the northeast corner of the living room and I'm in the southwest." Walls. You can count on this. Once the habit of narrowing the circle is established, that narrowing becomes constriction, it grows, and soon our religion has room for no one but ourselves. Robert Frost put it like this: if one by one we counted people out for the least sin, it wouldn't take us long to get so we have no one left to live with. For to be social is to be forgiving, and forgiveness breaks down walls. But I think the most important objection to the strategy of Ezra and Nehemiah, and the most important affirmation of the mystery of Pentecost, is that good religion always entails removing walls, never building them. You know, sometimes Christians get it wrong. They get the horse before the cart. They think that the mission of Jesus Christ was to show God's love to the church. Not so. The church was established to show God's love to the world. Jesus' last words to his disciples, you remember them: "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to the whole creation." His word to that group of bunglers and stumblers was, "You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world." That is the role of good religion. Never to shut itself behind closed doors, but to always be reaching out to a world in need. So if our church or our circle of friends is made up of nothing but conservatives or liberals, nothing but whites or blacks, nothing but of who we are as opposed to who they are, then it is really less than it should be. If we close ourselves off behind a comfortable wall, and we get nervous about reaching out into the world and trying some different love and compassion, then the church becomes monotone and lifeless and spiritless. Are Pentecost and batshit crazy the same? Maybe so. The world needs that. It really does. Some years ago, there was a story in the papers about a young man named David. You may remember him. He's called the Bubble Boy. He lived in Houston, and he lived in an absolutely safe environment. For David, there were no germs, there were no viruses, there was no pollution. He had a severe immune deficiency, and therefore he had to live virtually all of his life inside that sterile plastic bubble. It was, in a sense, a perfectly safe environment, perfectly safe behind those plastic walls, and yet how David yearned for danger. He said he wanted to go barefoot out in the grass where you might get a sticker in your foot or cut it on a piece of glass. He was never in danger of falling out of a tree, but he never had the thrill of climbing one. He never stumbled, but he also never ran. I'm trying to say this morning that there's always a risk of living in this world to the beat of love and compassion. And yet I am convinced that's what the world needs, and it is our calling. Ezra and Nehemiah, those ancient people who find so many contemporaries that look like them today, built the walls and said, "Come out of the world and get within the walls." And those walls became a prison for the mind and for the spirit. Jesus comes along and tears down the walls and says, "Go into the world and be salt and light, the seasoning and illumination of love and compassion." Who could have imagined that somebody like Peter, who was such a die-hard Orthodox Jew, could have gone into the home of the centurion and said, "Truly I perceive that God shows no partiality." That is crazy, and yet it is exactly what love dictates. Robert Frost must have been inspired by love and compassion when he wrote the words, "Before I built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in and walling out. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down." Unity Church of Christianity, with love and compassion, we climb walls, we tear down walls, we make a way that is hospitable for all. People ask me, what are you doing with yourself? As though I sit and twiddle my thumbs all day long. And I give them the litany of my 3 jobs. One is rebuilding together, helping flood victims and get their homes back together. The other is Jubilee Pioneers that meets tomorrow night at Bocage. And the third is Unity Church of Christianity, serving as their interim. Oh, really? Where is that church? I've never heard of it. Well, it's out on Old Jefferson Highway. It's a little plain, sort of nondescript building, but you ought to come. You ought to come. Well, I might try it sometime. You will find them to be a delightfully different little church. Really? Why? They hug the fool out of you, that's why. And they will smother you with love and affection when you walk in the door, but give them a chance. And keep coming, and doggone if they don't get under your skin, and you begin to like that. You really do. You who are so self-sufficient and so self-protective and so in charge all the time, you begin to like it. It's the mystery. It's love. It's compassion. And if somebody were to walk in when we were doing our hugging thing a few moments ago and looked at this group, they'd say, they are crazy. And we might say, yeah, and you ought to try it. Because love does just that. It makes you crazy, and it brings you to a holy sanity that the world so desperately needs. So desperately, so desperately. Amen. Amen. We're going to sing a hymn. What is it, Jerry? We're going to do love. A little love, okay? And
let's stand. They have an insert in your bulletin.
Got one with